be our white matter. So again, your white matter is made up of your axons, and in the spinal cord, this is going to be the site of your ascending and your descending tracts. Everything on the inside is going to be gray matter, exactly. So your gray matter is going to be where your cell bodies are. So I don't know if you guys have, I don't think you guys have talked about this yet, but when you guys get to the neurosection, gray matter is going to be what makes up all of the nuclei in the central nervous system and what makes up all of the ganglia in the peripheral nervous system. And they're just clusters of cell bodies, okay? The white, where do we get the white from? The white comes from the myelin. So the myelin of the neurons is what's going to create white matter. So in the brain, that's going to be your tracts, and the spinal cord is going to be your different levels. So all of our cell bodies are going to start in the gray matter. And with the sympathetic nervous system, they're going to start on this lateral aspect. Okay, so again, the cell bodies of the sympathetic nervous system are going to start in this lateral horn. These are our lateral horns right here. These more anterior parts, these are called the ventral horns. The ventral horns are going to have the cell bodies for your somatic nervous system, okay? Specifically, your somatic efferent or motor system. So lateral, if you see cell bodies in the lateral spinal cord, you have to think sympathetic. If you see cell bodies in the ventral horn, you need to think somatic efferent, okay? So that's the first thing about the spinal cord to get oriented to. So we called this our ventral horn. We called this our lateral horn. What are these guys back here? Our dorsal horns. And what are our dorsal horns going to basically receive? They're going to receive your sensation, right? Does that make sense so far? Any questions? Okay. So I'm going to make one more point about these lateral horns. When you guys look at cross sections of the spinal cord at all the different levels of the spinal cord, so if you look at your cervical spinal cord, if you look at your lower lumbar spinal cord, obviously cauda you can't really see any of this, but in all of those other sections, you're not really going to see that lateral horn. So if they give you like a cross section of the spinal cord and you see these outpouching, you know you're going to be in your T1 to L2 level, okay? And if you don't see these outpouchings, you know it's either going to be in your cervical or it's going to be in your lower lumbar region. Okay, so now that we've taken care of that, let's start to move on to some of these nerves. What is this section of the nerve called? The dorsal root. And the dorsal root is going to be? Sensory. And what is this? Dorsal root ganglion. Why is it called a ganglion? And why is it like bulging out? Exactly. That's where exactly. So that's where the cell body is going to be in the nucleus within the cell body. So these are unusual neurons. These neurons, everyone kind of has in their head this idea of a neuron, which is completely accurate. Which is this is the cell body, this is the axon, and this is a exaggerated the synaptic bulb. So when we're talking about our sensory neurons, they have a different configuration. They have these sensory endings that they pick up. And they transmit them to another part, either to another part of the spinal cord or the brain. But the cell body kind of comes off just right in the middle of this axon. So this whole thing is all axon. This is your cell body. This is where it picks up the sensation, and this is where it transmits it to the next part. Either it's going to be a different nerve in the spinal cord, or it's going to go directly to part of the thalamus in the brain. Okay? So this is the sensory neuron, and that's why we have this little bulb out here. This is a ganglia, and remember, our ganglia are going to be collections of cell bodies. So would that make this white matter or more gray matter? It's going to be more similar to a gray matter structure. Good. Okay. And then what is this? Yeah, ventral roots are? Good. Yeah. So they are going to basically carry efferent signals out, right? So we have purely sensory coming in, and we have purely motor coming out. What is this? Ventral rami, or in singular, ventral ramus, and that's your dorsal ramus. You guys don't need to know too much about the dorsal ramus. Basically, it's just going to carry make sensory and motor towards some of your back muscles. And then in the ventral ramus, it's going to do similar things, but basically to the rest of the body. So it's going to be a mix of sensory and motor. Does that make sense? So this is going to be purely sensory here. This is going to be purely motor. These are going to be mixed sensory, mixed motor for your ramus. Okay? So roots, you have your trunk, and then you have your rami. Okay? So a lot of people have also been, I've had a few questions about what a spinal nerve is. So a spinal nerve is kind of a loose definition, but no, so sometimes it can be, but not strictly. This general region right here, where you have a crossing of the fibers, this region right here, so before the rami come off and the intersection of both of your roots, this general region is anatomically what they consider to be a spinal nerve. It's a fairly short segment. Some anatomists also call these spinal nerves, so kind of a loose definition. So that's your orientation to the spinal cord. That might have been review for some of you, but in case you've never learned that vocabulary, sometimes it's good just to go back to the basics and then sketch things out. Any questions so far? Okay, so what are these right here? Yeah, so your sympathetic chain. So your sympathetic chain is going to be part of your somatic nervous system or your visceral nervous system. Yeah, your autonomic or your visceral, yeah. So your autonomic nervous system, good. All right, so we're gonna start with just regular somatic sensation. So what's an example of somatic sensation? Yeah, so that's usually the description, right? So localized, pinpoint, pain, most of the time, pain, right? It can be any sort of sensation really that you can feel with any of your fingers, right? Fingers, hands, body, like anything that you can consciously perceive, that's going to be the what we're talking about when we're saying somatic afferent, okay? So let's talk about just normal somatic afferents. So if we start with our finger, let's say I were to touch something hot, like a candle. What you're gonna have is you're gonna have your sensory receptors in your skin, which is a combination of C unmyelinated, A delta, A beta fibers. All of those are going to come together in a sensory nerve. And so that it depends on the type of neuron. In the case of like C unmyelinated fibers, those just have free nerve endings. Other times it can be specifically like Pacinian receptors, or there's a whole slew of sensory receptors, and you guys are not responsible for them, but they're just different sensory receptors. They're not strictly dendrites. Dendrites come off of the cell body proper of the neuron. So like these would be dendrites. So we have our sensory receptors which pick up a signal, and let's say it's to our finger. If it's our finger, it's not our back, so which ramus is it going to go through? Is it going to go through the dorsal ramus, or is it going to go through the ventral ramus? Ventral ramus, because it's not our back, right? So those sensory receptors are going to come in like that. Now you have a choice. Are you going to go here or here? Who votes for A? Or who votes for B? A. Why A?
That's your dorsal root, so you have to go there for sensory to basically sense it first.
Exactly. Yeah. So exactly. Yeah. So we said this is purely sensory, right? So our neuron is going to go through to our dorsal root, right? It has a cell body right there, and it's going to continue on until it reaches the dorsal horn. Okay. At this point, we have spinal tracts. You guys don't really need to know them, but whether it's pain or whether it's balance or whether it's just normal vibration, they all travel in different spinal tracts. But at some point, it's going to go up towards the brain. Yeah.
And so wouldn't the other branch be the dorsal ones? It's on the dorsal side. You see on the, how about the rami?
Right here?
Yeah, would that be the dorsal?
Yeah, so if I were to like, let's just say if I were just to like push on my back like that, those sensory fibers are going to come in through my dorsal ramus.
Yeah, but isn't that the ventral one?
Yeah, that's ventral ramus. So like if we're talking about my fingers, right? It's basically not my back, so it's gonna come in through my ventral ramus.
Oh, because they're mixed. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, good question. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you have a question?
Okay, so the dorsal ramus, like it would took the other pathway if we were touching on the back.
Correct, yeah. So let's say if I did touch my back, if I was touching my back, I have sensory receptors on my back. They come in, and they still go, they come in from my dorsal ramus, but they're still going to come up into my dorsal root. Yeah, and here's my ganglia, and then the root proper. Okay. All right, so we talked about the basic sensation, so that's called somatic sensation, all right? Now we also have somatic motor, or somatic efferents, right? And where are somatic efferents going to start? In the spinal cord. Yeah, exactly. So we have cell bodies in this region right here, and they are going to give off an axon that travels along the ventral root, and it synapses towards some sort of target. Usually, these are going to be muscle, okay? Because it's motor, these are things that we can control with our mind, right? So I'm just drawing the spinal cord right here. We actually have higher areas of the brain that come down and activate this neuron. We're not going to talk about that right now. But the big idea is that these are just single neuron connections, and that's a really high yield point to remember. When we talked about sympathetics, we're going to be talking about 2 neuron circuits. Does that make sense? Anyone have any questions so far? Yeah.
So your burning sensation is going to travel along the ventral rami, up the dorsal root, then to the dorsal horn.
Ganglia, then dorsal horn.
So let's just do, we'll just stick, instead of doing pain, because pain actually gets a little bit fuzzy, whether it's sympathetic or parasympathetic, let's just do normal sensation. Okay, so like I'm just touching something and I'm able to perceive that sensation. If it's with my finger, it's going to come in through my ventral ramus, and it's going to come into my spinal nerve, and it's going to travel along this dorsal root, and then it's going to synapse in my dorsal horn of the spinal cord. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then at this point, there would be another neuron, right, another cell body right there, and then it would go up to the brain, to the parietal lobe. Okay. Does that clear that up? Yeah.
Jeremy, was your question also stemming from like the anterior versus posterior side? Like where-
No, just where it was going once it gets past the rami.
All right. So, any other questions about the somatic system? So this is the first system to learn. Once you have this down pretty well, now you can start to build up, and then now we can talk about our sympathetic nervous system. So like we said, the sympathetic nervous system is a subset of your autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system, just like it sounds, this is the stuff that you can't really perceive much. This is automatically happening. So when we think about our heart rate, we're not actually thinking about our heart rate, right? It's just going as it, does its thing. We're not thinking about peristalsis whenever we eat a meal. We swallow, but then the peristalsis kind of takes over. We don't have to use any of our higher order, processes to run peristalsis. So that's all autonomic nervous system. There's 2 branches of autonomics. You have your sympathetics, and then you have your parasympathetics. So I think everyone hopefully knows by this point where our sympathetics come from. Which levels?
Thoracolumbar.
T1 to L2, good. So also our thoracolumbar, right? And then what about parasympathetics? Yeah, so craniosacral, right? And vagus makes up part of that cranial part, right? So craniosacral. Good. All right, so we're just going to be focusing on sympathetic nervous system right now. So the basic schema for a sympathetic nervous system neuron is that we have a preganglionic neuron and a postganglionic neuron. Okay? The preganglionic neuron is a short neuron. The postganglionic neuron is a long neuron. You have one cell body here and another cell body here. This cell body right over here, this originates in our spinal cord. What part of the spinal cord? lateral horn, right? So lateral horn is going to be where your cell bodies of the sympathetic nervous system start.
Then you only have the lateral horn between T1 and L2.
Good. You only have the lateral horn T1 to L2. This is where the cell bodies of our sympathetic nervous system start. So this cell body right here corresponds to this cell body in my preganglionic neuron. Okay? And then we have a postganglionic neuron, which is this, and it's going to be longer. And so this cell body, where would that be found? In my sympathetic schema. In the sympathetic, yeah, exactly. So we have the sympathetic chain. Why do we call it a chain? Because there are multiple ganglia that are linked up with each other. That looks like a chain. Okay, so this is a ganglia, this is a ganglia, this is a ganglia, and they're all interconnected. That's what makes it a chain. Cool? So this, all of those cell bodies correspond to the cell body of our postsympathetic, postganglionic neuron. Does that make sense so far, guys? Yeah.
Why do the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems need two neurons to do something, as opposed to just like some, somatic neurons that only need one to do something?
It's a good question. I'm sure there's some evolutionary reason for that. The only thing I can think of is that because you have two neurons, there's a lot more space for modulation of your nervous system, and so you can have different higher parts of the brain to modulate different areas of your nervous system. But I'm not sure the exact reason. So the chain is what allows for the redundancy. That
But being able to synapse with another nerve, that's not.
I'm sure
It's not-
to a
it's
certain
not just
degree, yeah.
One nerve synapsing with one nerve, it's one nerve synapses, and this nerve synapses, and this nerve goes out, right?
Correct, yeah. So if we were to look at the neurons in series, if you don't have neuron A, neuron B can't work. But because we set up the chain, then that affords us our redundancy. So if, neuron A, so if this is neuron A and neuron B, if neuron A is not working, well, neuron C, which is higher up, can possibly activate this because it's part of a chain, right? So the chain offers more of that redundant pattern rather than the two neurons themselves offering redundancy. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm guessing you would need that redundancy because it's sympathetic, like if you're in survival, it's like you gotta have like a fail-safe.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's some evolutionary reason for it. As far as your guys' practical goes and your written exam, you don't need to know that. Fun to think about, but yeah, this exact reason why I'm not too sure, and I'm sure it's still debated. But is there any questions on the processes themselves? No? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. So when we have our sympathetic nervous system is going to be our fight or flight reflex, right? So, way back in the day, we're running away from a tiger, right? We have a lot of things that need to be activated. Our vessels need to vasodilate. Our pupils need to dilate as well, so we let in more light into our eye. We're going to be sweating a little bit more so that we can cool ourselves. We're going to suspend all of our parasympathetic functions because when we're running away from the lion, we don't really need to focus on digesting the cheesecake, right? So all of those are going to be suspended, and we're going to focus on getting all of our energy to our muscles, to our brain, to our eyes, all the things that matter, right? So these circuits work very, very quickly. They all start in the lateral horn, okay? And from the lateral horn, they are going to give off a neuron, they're going to give off an axon. It's going to travel through my ventral, what's this called? Ventral root. It's going to travel through to my spinal cord, and then where does it go? The white ramus. So this neuron is going to come down through the white ramus. So this is my sympathetic ganglion. This right here is my white ramus communicans.
So it's the more lateral ones?
Usually, yeah. Yeah. And then this is my gray ramus communicans. So it's first going to come in to my white ramus communicans, and then it's going to synapse. It's going to synapse with the cell body. This is the same cell body that makes this a ganglion. And that cell body, which is part of my postganglionic neuron, so that's right here, right? This is the synapse right here. That cell body is going to give off another axon that's going to come back to our spinal nerve via the gray ramus communicans. So it comes in through the white and it goes out with the gray. And then that axon is going to continue with your spinal nerve. And usually most of the time it's going to come out to your through your ventral ramus. It can with the dorsal ramus as well, because we need to maintain a little bit of posture when we're trying to run away, right? So, but that's not as important. The main principle to remember is that it comes in through the white, synapses at that ganglia, and it goes out with your gray, and then that acts on some sort of effector, okay? And what is that effector? Like we said, this is all the stuff that's going to be happening automatically. So whether it's the pupil of your eye, whether it's the nerves that stop digestion, whether it's the nerves that activate your muscles, whether it's the nerves that causes your vessels to vasodilate, all of those are part of your sympathetic nervous system. Cool? Okay. Any questions about that?
So the signal can also go like between ganglia.
Exactly, yeah, and that brings me to my next point. So we have T1 and L2, right? These are the parts of the spinal cord that are going to have these lateral horns. Now, does everyone agree that if this is T1, we still need sympathetic to our entire face, right? We need to be, the biggest one is your eyes. You have to be able to dilate your eyes. But T1 ends right here. So we still need to give off sympathetics, and it's not going to come from our cranial part, because that's where your parasympathetics are coming from. So what do we do? Well, the body has a sympathetic chain that continues all the way up. And I think it continues to like the angle of the neck. This is where like your superior cervical ganglia are located. So these chains are going to continue to go up, even though there is no lateral horn, at that level. So C1, there is no lateral horn in C1 spinal cord, but it's still going to have some sort of chain associated with it. And where do those neurons come from? Well, they're going to come from T1. Okay? So if this is my T1 and this is my superior cervical ganglion, let's track that. So that's the next thing we're going to draw. So we have another cell body, which is right here. It's going to give off an axon, ventral root, and now we're going to be right here. Okay? So notice that on this drawing, which is quite crude, this ganglia right here is connected to that ganglia right there. Does that make sense? So what's going to happen is, as this axon comes in, it's going to enter into the white rami communicans at that level, so at T1. So we're still at T1. But then, instead of synapsing at the T1 ganglia, it's going to ascend the chain. It's going to go up the chain, and it's going to synapse with the cell body in the superior cervical ganglia. Then, at that point, at the superior cervical ganglion, we'll have another cell body, and that's going to give off a postganglionic neuron out from the gray rami communicans to the spinal nerve, and then to the appropriate effector. Does that make sense? So the big thing to remember there, and this is kind of one of those test questions that can trick you, is that as this axon is coming up towards that superior cervical ganglion and gives off a postganglionic neuron, where is that postganglionic neuron going to exit? Is it the white rami communicans, or is it the gray rami communicans? Gray, because your postganglionics always exit out the gray rami communicans. Postganglionic neurons always exit out of the gray rami communicans. And that was the question that we had with the superior cervical ganglion on the Jeopardy. Okay. You don't need to know the specifics about the SCG at this point, but this is just kind of the general principle to help you understand your sympathetic nervous system. Cool. Any questions?
So you say it's a two synapse or two neuron chain. Does the postganglionic neuron interface directly with the brainstem, or does it interface?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. And when you guys look at the eye has a much more complicated path, but you have your long ciliary nerve that's going to interface with different parts of the eye. One of them is going to be the muscle, the iris, right? So the iris is going to basically open up, and that causes your mydriasis, or the opening of the pupil that allows in more light. That's all mediated by that second neuron, the postganglionic neuron. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
What would we call the connectors between the ganglion and the sympathetic chain?
I just refer to it as a chain. I'm sure there's some anatomical name I'm not too sure. Do you guys know what that is called?
If they tag that, it's gonna be chain.
Yeah, if they do tag that sympathetic chain, just call it sympathetic
Yeah.
chain. Yeah.
It's not bad as I thought.
No, it's not as bad. When you draw it out a few times, it starts to, and hopefully the dots start to connect. Then usually it's fairly straightforward. Okay. So we talked about that superior ascension of your neurons, right? Now, by the same token, your L2 spinal cord level, which is also going to have that lateral horn, that's going to do the same exact thing, right? It's going to give off your preganglionic neuron. It's going to go in through the white rami communicans, synapse at the ganglia, and then come out via the gray rami communicans to the effector, right?
So you know how the cervical ganglia, they don't have any roots coming off of them, but they're still an extension of the chain. Is it the same kind of thing in like the pelvic region?
Exactly, yeah. So you bring me to my next point, is what happens if we have what happens when we have organs that need sympathetic innervation, but they're at the level of L3, L4, L5, S1, S2, S3. We talked about a bunch of them just today, right? All of your pelvic organs during contraction, during labor, and you have to contract. I think a lot of people would understand that's not a rest and digest phase, right? It's very much fight or flight. So sympathetics are going to be crucial when we're talking about things like delivery. So in those cases, those pelvic organs, which are well below the level of L2, those spinal cord levels, it's saccade equina, they don't have any lateral horns. Where are they getting their nerves from? It's going to be from L2. So the L2 level is going to give off the similar sort of principle that we talked about, right? It's going to give off your preganglionic. It's going to go through your ventral root. It's going to synapse not at the ganglia at that level, but it's going to descend and synapse at the cell body at that lower level, say, S2. And then at S2, that cell body is going to give off a postganglionic axon, which is going to be your long neuron, and then that's going to go to your effector organ via the gray rami communicans. Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay, what are the levels of your greater splanchnic nerve? T5 through T9. Is that going to be sympathetic or parasympathetic? Sympathetic, right? So that's going to be an exception to this general schema. Okay, so when we're talking about our greater splanchnics, those are still going to be your sympathetic nervous system, but those axons are not going to synapse directly at this sympathetic ganglion. They're actually going to continue as their own independent neuron. It's going to pierce the diaphragm, and then it's going to synapse at a separate ganglion. And in the case of the greater splanchnic nerve, what's the ganglion that it synapses with? The celiac plexus. And where's the celiac plexus? Good. So as that continues, as that, the greater splanchnic comes down, it's going to synapse with your celiac plexus. The celiac plexus is going to give off a postganglionic neuron, and that's going to go towards, the stomach, for example, and that's going to mediate your sympathetics towards the stomach. Why does the stomach need sympathetics? So what's rest and digest? Parasympathetics. So why do we need sympathetics for the stomach? So you can stop resting and digesting. So those are gonna be, generally, it's gonna be more inhibitory factors. So inhibitory neurotransmitters are going to act on those on those parasympathetic fibers, shut them down.
So
Yeah.
the greater splanchnic nerve is a branch of axon that synapses at a cell body in the celiac plexus. So it doesn't synapse. The beginning of the splanchnic nerve does not synapse with anything in the trunk. And I mean anything in the chain.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. It's going to not synapse at the chain, but it's going to synapse at the celiac ganglion. And those are what they call the pre-aortic ganglia. So sympathetic chain, it's right when you look at it for your practical. What you want to do is you want to look at in, like, say, they'll probably tag it in the mediastinum. That's the best place to tag it. And for most of you guys saw it, they're going to tag that superior structure, that superior nerve, right? That's going to be your greater splanchnic. The part that's a little bit more posterior, that's going to be your sympathetic chain, and it kind of looks like a string with beads on it. So it, like, comes out, then comes in, then comes out, then comes in. It's pretty obvious. You'll know it when you see it. So that's your sympathetic chain. Your greater splanchnic is going to be just a fully independent neuron. Yeah. So the sympathetic chain, that's right next to your vertebrae. That's why they're called paravertebral ganglia. Your celiac ganglia, those are, as you guys all saw, it's like right underneath that celiac plexus, right? Or the celiac axis and trunk, yeah. So those are what we call the pre-aortic ganglia. Yeah.
So is the greater splanchnic, like its origin from the spinal cord, is it a bunch of ventral rami that all form together?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of like we just came off of our ventral root, but we're going to bypass the chain, and then it's just gonna turn into its ventral rami, and then goes together.
So usually, most diagrams that I've seen, they actually come off not just from specifically the ventral ramus. They'll continue down this way, and then they'll give off a neuron. But the main thing is that it actually bypasses this this ganglia right here. That's the big take-home message, is that it's not going to synapse with the paravertebral ganglia, the sympathetic chain. It's going to go. It has its own independent neuron. It's going to pierce through the diaphragm, synapse at either the celiac ganglia, SMA ganglia, or the IMA ganglia, and then it's going to have an effect on whatever the nerve is, or whatever the effect or target is.
Question. And usually the signals being sent is for vasoconstriction or dilation.
Not always. There's a variety of functions for them. When we're talking about the most common textbook example is, for sympathetics at least, is going to be vasodilation to your muscles, but it's also going to vasoconstrict the vessels that feed the GI system, because we don't want to waste our blood. Yeah, we want to shunt all the blood to the organs that we need to perfuse. So we're going to decrease perfusion to things that are generally parasympathetically innervated and increase perfusion to organs that are sympathetically innervated.
So organs that are innervated by splanchnic nerve, are they also innervated by the parasympathetic? So the nerve right there, like the stomach, is innervated by a greater splanchnic nerve, right?
Yeah, sympathetic.
Is it also innervated by?
So yeah, so the greater splanchnic is the sympathetic component. So yeah, it's not the chain.
The splanchnic nerve is not part of the chain itself, right? It doesn't actually go into the chain, it's actually off.
Correct. Yeah. So it's a little bit. That's where there's some redundancy. Some of it can come from your sympathetic chain proper, but most of it's going to come from your greater splanchnic. Okay. So that's the big stuff for sympathetics. You guys are welcome to stick around if you have questions. I know Erica. Sorry, I think I used up all your time. Erica.